In the summer of 2022, a discovery was made that would haunt Yosemite National Park for years to come. The skeletal remains of a man who had been missing for almost 4 years were found deep in the mountains. What was truly unsettling, however, wasn't just the body that had been hidden for so long, but a chilling detail found beside it. His backpack, containing his documents, a phone, and a water bottle, wasn't lying discarded next to the bones as one might expect. Instead, it was standing upright at the very edge of a cliff, placed there as if someone had carefully positioned it, almost as if to mark his final journey. But who and why? The questions surrounding Andrew Taylor's disappearance only deepened as the search for answers began to reveal more strange, unexplainable facts. Could this really be just an accident, or was there something more sinister lurking in the shadows of this vast wilderness? Andrew Taylor was no stranger to the mountains. At 32 years old, he was an experienced hiker with a deep love for the wilderness, often venturing out alone to find solace and adventure in the remote corners of nature. His preferred style was solo hiking, a way to escape the noise of the world and recharge his spirit. Andrew had always been a man of meticulous planning, especially when it came to his trips. He knew the risks of hiking alone, but thrived on the challenge. His next adventure would take him to Yosemite National Park, a place known for its vast beauty and treacherous terrain. On October 18, 2018, Andrew set out for the famous Mist Trail, a popular route leading to the iconic Half Dome. His plan was clear. He would reach Little Yosemite Valley, set up camp, and then tackle the challenging ascent to the summit of Half Dome the following day. Afterward, he would return to his base camp and head back home. His friends knew of his plans and were aware that Andrew was a seasoned hiker, confident in his abilities and comfortable with solitude. They expected him to return on October 21st, having completed his hike. He promised to keep in touch and check in, but as the day passed with no word from Andrew, his friends began to worry. By the evening of October 21st, after repeated attempts to reach him, concern turned to alarm. It wasn't like Andrew to go silent, especially after a promise to call. When the days continued to pass without any contact, his friends realized something was wrong. On October 23rd, with no sign of Andrew, they contacted Yosemite National Park's emergency services. The response was immediate, given the high priority of missing person cases in such a vast and dangerous park. Rangers and volunteers were dispatched right away, beginning their search in the areas Andrew was most likely to have been. His car, a blue Honda, was found in the parking lot by the start of the Mist Trail, still locked and untouched. This was the first indication that Andrew had entered the park and hadn't returned. It was the kind of clue that would send a chill down any ranger's spine. Andrew had been there, but where had he gone? And why wasn't he answering his phone? As the search began, no one knew that this disappearance would become one of Yosemite's most puzzling and disturbing mysteries. The search for Andrew Taylor began in earnest as soon as his friends contacted emergency services, but the first significant discovery was unsettling in its own way. On the second day of the search, a group of rangers made their way to the base of Little Yosemite Valley, where Andrew's camp was expected to be. When they arrived, they found the camp exactly as Andrew had left it, untouched and in perfect condition. The tent was still pitched neatly, the sleeping bag inside undisturbed, and a small stash of food remained untouched, as if he had simply stepped out for a brief walk. There were no signs of a struggle. No signs that an animal had rifled through his belongings. It looked as though he had left in a hurry, but there was nothing here to suggest that anything went wrong. There were no signs of foul play, no visible damage to his gear, and no traces of anything out of the ordinary. It was both reassuring and deeply unsettling. If Andrew had set up camp here and left without any trouble, then where was he, and why had he vanished so completely? The rangers reasoned that he must have continued on his journey towards Half Dome, a challenging and dangerous hike that involved scaling sheer granite cliffs and using metal cables to help climbers reach the top. A logical next step in the search was to focus on this treacherous route, but what they soon realized was that the terrain around Half Dome was as unforgiving as it was vast. The search teams expanded their efforts, combing through dense forests and scanning the steep, rocky trails. Helicopters circled the valley, hoping to spot anything out of place. But despite the overwhelming number of people involved in the operation, the clues seemed to disappear into the landscape. The area around Half Dome was not only rugged but incredibly vast, and Andrew could have been anywhere. The terrain was full of cracks, crevices, and canyons where a person could fall without leaving a trace. The search quickly became more complex, and despite days of searching, no sign of Andrew had been found. The weather also began to worsen, with the unseasonably cold October rain turning to snow on the mountaintops, making the already dangerous search even more treacherous. Rangers were now faced with the grim reality that they might not be able to find any answers anytime soon. As the search continued, the sense of urgency grew, but so did the frustration. With every day that passed, the likelihood of finding Andrew alive grew slimmer. Yet still, no one gave up, and the search continued, driven by the faint hope that somewhere, hidden in the wilderness, a clue might finally surface to solve the mystery of Andrew Taylor's disappearance. As the days passed with no sign of Andrew, the search operation in Yosemite National Park grew increasingly difficult. Despite the best efforts of the rangers and volunteers, the sheer scale of the area and the unforgiving terrain made it nearly impossible to pinpoint where Andrew might be. 10 days into the search, the weather turned against them. What had started as clear skies soon gave way to unpredictable storms, with cold rain turning to snow at higher altitudes. The already treacherous conditions became even more dangerous for the search teams. The ground was slippery, and the risk of hypothermia for rescuers became a growing concern. After 10 days of relentless searching, with no clues and no trace of Andrew, the difficult decision was made to suspend the official search. For the rangers, this was a bitter blow. They had covered vast areas of the park, scoured every possible trail, and combed through the dense forests and rocky cliffs. Yet no one had found so much as a scrap of clothing or a broken branch to indicate Andrew's whereabouts. The search had become an exercise in futility. The emotional toll on Andrew's family and friends was immense, and as the days turned into weeks, their hope began to fade. Officially, the case was closed, but the unanswered questions remained. As the investigation concluded, the prevailing theory was that Andrew's disappearance had been the result of a tragic accident. The wilderness, with its sheer cliffs and hidden ravines, could be a brutal and unforgiving place. Rangers believed that Andrew, perhaps while hiking the steep trail to Half Dome, had lost his footing and fallen into one of the deep crevices that crisscrossed the mountain. With the treacherous terrain, it was possible that his body had been carried away or hidden in a place so remote that it was nearly impossible to locate. The theory made sense in many ways, as it was consistent with the absence of any signs of foul play or struggle. No one had seen anything suspicious, and there were no indications that anyone had been involved in Andrew's disappearance. It was simply the tragedy of the wilderness claiming yet another victim. Yet, as time passed and the search was officially suspended, a nagging feeling lingered. There was something about Andrew's disappearance that didn't sit right. Something was missing from the story. The official conclusion may have been an accident, but the mystery of Andrew Taylor's fate was far from over. In the summer of 2022, nearly 4 years after Andrew Taylor's mysterious disappearance, a discovery would once again draw attention to the case, stirring up fresh questions and suspicions. It all began when a group of park geologists, working as part of a routine survey near Little Yosemite Valley, stumbled upon something unusual. While studying the rock formations and glacial moraines, one of the geologists spotted something out of place, something that stood out against the gray granite of the mountainside. It was a bright blue object, barely visible among the sparse vegetation. Intrigued, they approached and discovered that it was a backpack. At first glance, it didn't seem extraordinary. Yet something about it didn't sit right. The backpack wasn't lying flat, nor had it rolled down the cliffside, as one might expect. Instead, it was standing upright on a narrow ledge, precariously balanced on the edge of a deep crevice. There was no sign of any damage to the bag, no sign of it being tossed or dragged. It looked as though it had been carefully placed there, as if someone had taken the time to position it with intention. This discovery sent a chill down the spines of the geologists, who immediately recognized the name on the backpack. It belonged to Andrew Taylor, the missing hiker whose case had long been considered a tragic accident. Upon further inspection of the area around the backpack, the geologists noticed something even more unsettling. Down below, within the narrow crevice at the foot of the ledge, they spotted something white bones. The discovery of human remains in such a remote location raised more questions than answers. The geologists contacted the park rangers, and soon a full investigation team arrived at the scene. The body at the bottom of the crevice was confirmed to be Andrew Taylor's, but the circumstances surrounding his death remained baffling. The recovery of Andrew's remains would prove to be a painstaking and delicate operation. Climbing equipment was used to lower a rescuer into the deep fissure, where they carefully retrieved the skeletal remains, which had been undisturbed for nearly 4 years. The body was mostly skeletal, with the clothes having deteriorated over time due to the elements. But it wasn't just the discovery of the body that raised alarms. It was the bizarre positioning of the backpack, still standing upright on the ledge, and the strange sense of finality it conveyed. The discovery brought with it a renewed sense of mystery. How had Andrew ended up in such a remote and dangerous spot? Had he fallen, or had something else happened? And, most troubling of all, why had his backpack been placed so deliberately at the edge of the cliff? The answers, it seemed, were just as elusive as they had been when he first disappeared. As the investigation into Andrew Taylor's death continued, more and more unsettling details began to emerge, casting doubt on the initial assumption that this was a simple accident. When the remains were carefully retrieved from the deep crevice, the search team began to investigate the area around the site with even greater scrutiny. What they found only deepened the mystery. One of the most perplexing discoveries were the knee marks found near the edge of the crack where Andrew's body had been found. These weren't the typical signs of someone falling or being dragged, but clearly defined impressions in the dust and soil, as if someone had been kneeling on the very edge of the precipice. The marks were symmetrical and well-formed, as though someone had been kneeling for an extended period, perhaps even in a deliberate and thoughtful manner. This discovery raised numerous questions. How could these knee marks have appeared if Andrew had simply slipped or fallen? If he had fallen, where were the signs of a struggle, the desperate marks of someone trying to stop themselves from tumbling into the abyss? And, most chillingly, who had been kneeling there, so close to the edge of a sheer drop? It suggested that someone, or something, had been present at that spot with a calmness that didn't align with a typical accident. The other oddity that struck the investigators was the condition of Andrew's backpack. Despite being exposed to the harsh elements of the Yosemite wilderness for nearly 4 years, the backpack was in surprisingly good condition. There was no significant wear, no damage from animals, and no sign of it being exposed to the extreme weather conditions that frequently swept through the park. The zippers worked smoothly, and the fabric was not torn or faded. Even more curiously, the backpack had not been moved or knocked over by animals or natural forces. It had been placed upright on the narrow ledge, as if someone had deliberately positioned it there. This wasn't the action of someone caught in a desperate moment. It was a calm, methodical placement. The bag had been left there, perhaps as a message or as a way to mark the spot. The knee marks and the undisturbed state of the backpack were in stark contrast to the chaotic nature of a typical accident, raising even more disturbing questions. Had Andrew been alive when his body was lowered into the crevice? If so, why hadn't there been any signs of a struggle or injury consistent with a fall? The scene suggested something far more deliberate and far more unsettling than an accidental death. With every new discovery, the mystery deepened, and the official theory of an accident began to feel increasingly inadequate. As the investigation into Andrew Taylor's death drew to a close, the official theory began to take shape. The forensic team considered several possibilities for his cause of death, including natural causes such as a heart attack or suffocation. Given the lack of visible injuries on his body, no signs of a struggle, and the absence of any trauma that would suggest a fall, they speculated that Andrew might have died from something as undramatic, yet equally fatal, as a medical condition. The idea that he could have suffered a heart attack, a seizure, or even a respiratory failure while alone in the wilderness seemed plausible. It would explain the lack of signs of a violent altercation, the absence of external injuries, and the way his body had ended up in the deep crevice. It was a tragic but not entirely unusual conclusion. A lone hiker succumbing to a health issue in a remote area, far from help. However, this explanation left many questions unanswered. The knee marks, so deliberate and precise, did not fit with the image of a man who had simply fallen ill and collapsed. The placement of his backpack on the edge of the cliff, standing upright and untouched, did not align with a simple accident or natural death either. The more investigators dug into the circumstances, the more the details seemed to contradict the accident theory. While the pathologist's findings pointed to a natural cause of death, there was still something deeply unsettling about the way Andrew's body had been found. It just didn't sit right. The official conclusion, therefore, was a tragedy brought on by an accident, possibly exacerbated by a health issue. With no evidence of foul play or any external trauma, the case was officially closed. Andrew Taylor's name was filed away, his story wrapped up in the confines of a mysterious accident, though the details continued to linger in the minds of those who had followed his case. Yet, even as the official report was sealed, the story didn't truly end. There were whispers among the long-serving park rangers, those who had spent decades in the shadows of Yosemite's towering cliffs. Some believed that Andrew's case was not unique. Over the years, there had been other unexplained disappearances in the same areas of the park, with several other hikers, often lone travelers like Andrew, vanishing without a trace, only to have their remains discovered years later in remote, almost inaccessible places. Each case bore striking similarities: the lack of visible injuries, the strange locations where the bodies were found, and the unsettling lack of closure. For these rangers, the eerie pattern was impossible to ignore. They spoke of these disappearances in hushed tones, wondering if there was more to these events than met the eye. The official version of Andrew Taylor's death might have been closed, but to some, the truth remained frustratingly out of reach. The mystery surrounding Andrew Taylor's death remains unsolved, leaving more questions than answers. Despite the official conclusion of an accidental death, the strange details surrounding his disappearance, such as the knee marks at the cliff's edge and his undamaged backpack, continue to haunt those who have followed his case. Was it truly an accident? Or is there something more sinister lurking in the shadows of Yosemite's vast wilderness? The eerie similarities to other disappearances in the area suggest that this might not be the last time a story like Andrew's unfolds, yet we may never know the full truth. As we leave you with these unanswered questions, we invite you to think deeply about the mystery. What do you believe happened to Andrew Taylor? Could there be a hidden explanation, or was it simply a tragic set of circumstances? The unanswered questions still echo in the quiet corners of Yosemite, and perhaps in your own mind too. If you enjoyed this chilling tale and want to dive deeper into more true crime mysteries, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the gripping stories we have in store. Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going, because the truth is often stranger than fiction.